Hello and welcome to Audiobook Reviews. In this video, I'll be discussing The Black Company by Glen Cook. This marks the start of the Chronicles of the Black Company, which spans 2 decades of publication with many entries into the series. I'd long heard really good things about The Black Company, but this was my first foray into Glen Cook's world. The first thing I have to say is simply, wow. Despite being published in the 80s, I can't say I've ever read something quite like this. The story opens with a feel of MASH meets Malazan with some Full Metal Jacket thrown in for good measure. And even that only brushes the surface. My immediate thought was Steven Erikson definitely must have been inspired by this, and I later noticed that he actually did the quote for the version of the book that I have on the back. Through a winding narrative, we read the story of the Black Company as seen through the eyes of Croker, the company's physician and also the one in charge of recording their history in the annals. We're thrown immediately into this bleak world with no preparation, no ado, and quickly learn how brutal the lives of these mercenaries are. The narrative structure is extremely unique, and that's part of what makes the story so gripping. You feel almost like you've stumbled upon an old journal and are reading accounts of men long dead. As you're reading a written record, you only see what Croker sees, and you're only told what he thinks is noteworthy. A passage that stood out to me really early on was Croker explaining that they had received orders to seize a fort from the enemy, take control, and then kind of get entrenched. Croker explains that, very simply, they did. And then the next few pages follow the account of one of the many games of a card game called Tonk, which is where we learn a lot about the nature of many of the characters that we see a lot of. The narrative structure can be a bit jarring, but it somehow seems so incredibly appropriate. We jump around a lot, gloss over certain things, and then get lots more detail in others. It all depends on what Croker feels is worth telling, and he'll be the first to admit that he tends to sometimes leave things out when he thinks they won't serve the Black Company's records well, and sometimes he will embellish a little bit to make this band of mercenaries maybe not look quite so bad in the history. There's a scene where Croker is reading a passage out of the annals to the company where he reads for hours, telling the story of other members of the company from a long time in the past. He reads for hours and they all remain transfixed. Even a new recruit admits it made him feel like he knew what it must have been like to actually be in the Black Company during that time. Let me tell you, that's basically how the book ends up feeling for the reader as well. I've read other dark fantasy that does focus on the human aspect of war and fighting, but this series, that's just where it lives. There's no third-person narration, there's no additional background or explanations outside of what we get from Croker. His interactions make you feel like you not only know him, but also like you know the others that he's interacting with. The Black Company is a tight-knit group. They're brothers in arms, and they feel more than just camaraderie. They're a very close group, and you really feel that fellowship with them. I mentioned that Croker admits that he sugarcoats things a bit, but this story absolutely does not shy away from the horrors of war on either side. We see their enemies commit atrocities, we see their allies commit atrocities, and we see the company itself do its fair share as well. The story puts the Black Company commissioned by the forces that even they themselves look at as evil, but shows the other side being really no better. There is definite commentary on war and its futility and darker sides in this story, though it never feels pushed down your throat. It honestly feels more like what you would actually expect to hear from those who've been in war, who have fought and watched others die around them. This is a fantasy novel, but it feels more like a story about mercenaries and war that just happens to have fantastical elements in it. Many of the elements are vital to the story, but in a way very different from most fantasy novels. There are no heroes and villains in the classical sense. Both sides fighting have their fair share of evil, and for the most part you just have men trying to get by. We see beings that are vastly powerful and yet still can die, and we see those that are completely ordinary and have no power whatsoever live. The Black Company are an elite mercenary group, but they by no means are impervious to death or injury, more so than anyone else. Now, while I did enjoy this book, and I certainly am looking forward to continue the series, I do want to note that I don't think this is something that will necessarily be for everyone. I spent a fair amount of time talking about the unique narrative structure, and one of the side effects of that is the story can be slow at points and does tend to be more of a slow burn. I don't think this in any way detracts from the book overall, but I know many readers may find this style not working for them, especially those that like fast-paced, action-packed novels. There is plenty of action that's shown in the book, but there's plenty that's barely mentioned as well. There are even what would be pivotal scenes in many other books that we only see the aftermath of because we're following Croker. The story really is more about the personal experiences of those living through it than a dramatic retelling. We're reading history, essentially, the history of the Black Company. While this may be a turnoff for some, I think that if you do make it through and finish the first book, you will not be disappointed by what you get. The story is also plenty dark, as I've alluded to a little bit, though I wouldn't classify this as grimdark per se. This comes from before that was really the big popular thing, and it's just more old school dark fantasy for the most part. It's not trying to be dark, it's just not lying to you about the truth. Overall, I really think this is a book that just simply needs to be read to really experience it. I've talked a lot about different pieces, but it's something that you just need to read for yourself to really fully understand and get the full effect. With that, that's my review of The Black Company, the first book in the series of the same name by Glen Cook. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a like, and if you'd like to see more content like this, please feel free to subscribe.